Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
AARP Florida believes that voters 50 and older often have the power to decide elections. That's why AARP has collected up-to-date information about when, where, and how to vote. More information is at aarp.org/FLVotes. Florida Eye Specialists, customizing your vision to your lifestyle with the new Light Adjustable Cataract Lens technology. More information at floridaeyespecialists.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, why some women are being required to turn over their cell phones and even their food stamps at maternity centers around Florida. We talked to the reporter behind a new investigation into the often unregulated homes at a time of increasing pressures on housing and pregnancy. Then, after his opponent had to leave the race, Atlantic Beach Mayor Curtis Ford now faces election unopposed. We ask him what we can expect in his second term. And a new art walk event at St. John's Cathedral explores the question, what's going on? Join the conversation. Send your questions or comments to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org or tag us on social media. You can also reach us on air at 904-549-2937. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Israel is planning to strike Iran in the coming weeks, according to an official who spoke with NPR on condition of anonymity. Israel says it will be in retaliation for Iran's recent missile attack. Israeli officials have informed the Biden administration that Israel is planning to strike Iran before the U.S. general election on November 5th. The U.S. and Israel have been closely coordinating on the nature of Israel's retaliation. The U.S. has rejected a potential Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Vice President Kamala Harris will campaign in the swing state of Michigan today. From member station WDET, Quinn Kleinfelter reports Harris will make a pitch to black voters at a rally in Detroit as the city begins early voting later this week.
Harris joins a national radio show broadcasting from Detroit today that targets black men. She returns to Michigan Friday, stumping in areas including Metro Detroit's Oakland County. Former President Donald Trump is said to be there that day, too. Last week at the Detroit Economic Club, Trump disparaged the majority black city, but vowed to protect jobs in its signature auto industry with heavy tariffs.
And you will see a mass exodus of manufacturing jobs, but from Mexico to Michigan.
Former President Obama is scheduled to campaign for Harris in Detroit early next week. For NPR News, I'm Quinn Kleinfelter in Detroit.
Florida has reopened nearly all of its seaports, although some with restrictions following Hurricane Milton. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says the state will provide $9.5 million to cover recovery efforts at Seaport Manatee. That's at the entrance to Tampa Bay. Central Florida Public Media's Danielle Pryor reports this handles hundreds of millions of gallons of gas a year.
DeSantis says the funding will ensure that fuel is flowing again at the port, which generated $275 million in state and local revenue last year.
For every state dollar invested in seaport infrastructure, the expected return on investment for the state is $7. But even beyond that, we want to make sure that our supply chain is strong and that we get the port back to where it needs to be as soon as possible.
The governor says the port suffered more than $200 million in losses from damage incurred during Hurricane Milton. Seaport Manatee is the primary deepwater seaport in southwest Florida, handling gas along with produce and other supplies. For NPR News, I'm Danielle Pryor in Orlando.
Officials with FEMA say they've resumed work in western North Carolina after that was briefly suspended over the weekend. That was because of threats allegedly saying a militia was going to target FEMA workers who are helping residents recover from Hurricane Helene. North Carolina authorities have now arrested and charged a man with making the threats. You're listening to NPR News from Washington.
It's 4 minutes after 9. This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. The Everbank Stadium renovation agreement between the city of Jacksonville and the Jaguars will be voted on by NFL owners at their fall meeting in Atlanta today. It's the final hurdle that the nearly $1.5 billion stadium deal needs to clear before it's fully approved. The Jacksonville City Council gave the project a thumbs up on June 25th. Now 24 of the NFL's 32 owners must give their approval for the work to begin. Jags owner Shad Khan has said he's confident the owners will give the deal a go-ahead. Students are back in school this week after being out much of last week because of Hurricane Milton. The question school districts face now is how to make up for the lost time to Milton and Hurricane Helene. Stetson University education professor Rajni Shankar-Brown says the double whammy of Helene and Milton has taken a physical and emotional toll on students and staff.
I do think the back-to-back hurricanes have been tough. And so some, school districts are having to kind of juggle and figure things out. And I don't think it's as easy as, we allocated this extra time, but it's really trying to figure out how do we make all of this work now instructionally for students.
Duval County schools were closed for 2 days during Helene and 3 days for Milton. The temperature's in the low 60s now, getting to 81 this afternoon under a mostly sunny sky. We also have a moderate rip current risk today.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Solidigm, focused on making solid-state storage optimized for performance and efficiency. Solidigm believes a new era in AI requires a new approach to data storage. StorageForAI.com.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, at a time when both rents and pregnancy restrictions are increasing, a new wave of maternity homes is meeting the need. But a recent investigation found concerning policies in some homes that appear to border on confinement. We talked to the report's author. Later, with Atlantic Beach Mayor Curtis Ford now a shoo-in for re-election, we ask him what a second term means for his beach community's residents. But first, a proliferation of unregulated maternity homes caught the eye and the interest of my guest. Laura Morel is an investigative reporter for Reveal covering reproductive health and a fellow with the New York Times Local Investigations Fellowship. This report was a partnership between both. Laura joins us now by phone. Good morning, Laura.
Hi, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, Laura. How did you first hear about these homes?
So I've been covering reproductive health for the last few years in Florida, and a couple years ago, I was working on a series of stories about crisis pregnancy centers. And it was during the course of that reporting that I learned about these kinds of homes. Historically, these places go back more than a century ago. Historically, these were places where unmarried pregnant women could go to give birth and then place their babies up for adoption. Most of these places shut down by the 1970s when birth control became more available. So I was really interested in learning about the mission of present-day maternity homes and what it's like for women who rely on their services today.
And so this was an extensive investigation that you undertook. Tell us a little bit about the scope of the work that you did.
Yeah, so we know that there are more than 450 maternity homes in the U.S. Because I'm based in Florida and because of the shifting landscape and abortion access in Florida, my story focused on this state where we identified 27 homes throughout the state. We ended up examining 17 of them by touring some of the homes, interviewing maternity housing providers, looking at codes of conduct that are posted on their websites, and also reading through police reports. In total, I ended up interviewing 48 people, including current and former residents, employees, and volunteers.
And so, what are these homes typically structured like in terms of who runs them, whether they're regulated, things like that?
Yeah. So they're often operated by charities. We found that most homes in Florida are affiliated with churches or Christian nonprofits. Many of them, as you alluded to, are also unlicensed and operate outside of state oversight. And I'm happy to get into that a little bit more. And unlike the homes of the past that I described, that were, primarily focused on adoption, homes today typically focus on keeping moms and babies together. The way that it works is that many allow expectant moms to stay there for free so that they can save money and be able to afford a permanent place to live. They're also helped with getting other resources like daycare vouchers and food stamps. And women often learn about these homes through either social services providers or crisis pregnancy centers, and they're voluntary programs as well.
And so you mentioned, the heyday of these homes maybe reached a zenith in the 70s when birth control became widely available, and the secretiveness around some births and adoptions diminished somewhat. But you've seen this almost like a nationwide renaissance. I mean, there's been this huge uptick in just the last couple years in terms of the numbers of these homes.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. And there's different factors that sort of lead to that. One of them is rising housing costs in this state and across the country, right? Have sort of led to this proliferation of these kinds of services. I interviewed several women who had full-time jobs, but still could not afford housing on their own as single mothers. So one of the only few options they had was moving into a maternity housing program. And the other sort of factor here that I think we'll see longer term impacts in the next few years is since Roe v. Wade was overturned, more of these homes are opening their doors around the United States. I think I mentioned, more than 450 in the U.S. currently. That number actually grew by nearly 40% in the past 2 years since Roe v. Wade was overturned. And we do expect that more homes are expecting to open in the next couple of years, as well as expand. A lot of these homes are also expanding their facilities so that they can serve more women and babies.
And so your reporting acknowledges that these homes are meeting a real need. Some cases, the women that are there are fleeing abuse. Sometimes they're women who have aged out of foster care, or some are, for instance, leaving rehab and really need a place that can restore them, give them a place to regroup, and as you say, save some money.
Yes, that's correct. These homes typically serve women who are in very, very vulnerable positions. Younger women, women that might be recovering from addiction, women who are leaving abusive relationships. And so it's a wide spectrum of different kinds of positions that these women find themselves in, and then ultimately end up going to these homes. So I've interviewed women who were, left abusive relationships and ended up going to housing programs. Also women who, were recovering from substance abuse, as well as what I mentioned earlier, this sort of, third caveat of women who just could not afford a place to live, and had no, support system from family or from a partner. And the only option they had was to move into a maternity home.
And so, all of that said, in your investigation, you found some concerns with some of these homes and their practices. So, tell us a little bit about some of the things that you found that might raise some alarms for people um, learning about them.
Yeah. So we found three main things, and I'll just sort of go through the buckets. So one of the things we found was that many of the homes require residents to agree to strict conditions that limit their communications with the outside world, their financial decisions, and even their movements. There's one home in particular in Naples, for example, that required women to get permission before leaving the property, and they also had to download a tracking app on their phones. I also spoke to women who told me that they had to lock their phones in a safe overnight. We also found at least 6 homes mandated attendance at morning prayer or church services as a condition of living in the home. And these were activities that a lot of the women I spoke to said felt like religious indoctrination to them. Another sort of category was several homes also required prohibited cell phone use at night. So you couldn't use your cell phone after, 10 p.m., for example. And some homes also have a probationary 30-day period where you can't use your phone at all. So in interviews with some of the maternity home leaders I spoke to, they told me that these rules were in place in order to ensure the safety of the women and their children. But, based on what they're telling me and what a lot of the women I spoke to tell me, it's clear that there's a tension between the safety, of these women as well as respecting these women's autonomy.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about maternity homes in Florida. They're the subject of a new investigation by my guest, reporter Laura Morel. If you've had experience with these homes personally or you have a question or comment, you can join us at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at WJCT.org or reach out on social media. Lauren, in terms of the obligations, for instance, attending a religious service, that can be common in some programs, rehab programs, I think of, that very often are faith-based. But you found in some cases that the requirement that somebody attend a service actually interfered with their ability to keep their job, to keep their medical appointments. So it was a little more onerous than just, I think, maybe what we think of as a faith-based resource.
Yeah, that's correct. There were several situations that my sources described that sort of go beyond into this onerous category. One home near West Palm Beach, I spoke to a woman who had to quit her job so that she could make it to all of the required programming that included morning prayer and attending church services and other religious services. And I also spoke to another woman who was at a facility in Orlando whose father had passed away. And then the next day, the women were expected to go to church. She asked to be excused because her father had just died, and the home refused to let her stay home. So these are just some of the, different sort of circumstances that come up and that, show the challenges that women face when, these, church attendance, mandated requirements are in place in these homes.
I want to talk a little bit more about regulations, but in that context, there was one particular home that had a practice that seemed a little outside of bounds, which was requiring the women to turn over their food stamps. Tell us a little bit about why they were doing that, why they were asked to do that, and what you found about whether that was appropriate.
Yes. So this is a home, Hannah's home of South Florida near West Palm Beach. I spoke to several women and former employees who described this practice where it was required that women who were staying at this home had to turn over their EBT cards to staff, who would then use the cards to order groceries through Instacart. And I, spoke to a couple of government assistance experts about this, and they told me that this practice, seems very problematic because we're talking about requiring women to turn over a resource that's available to them to another agency that doesn't have any sort of state or federal authority to facilitate their groceries for them. So that on its face, was very problematic to some of the experts I talked to. A lot of the women I spoke to were also frustrated as well because they had no control of their EBT cards. They talked about putting together grocery lists and, feeling frustrated when the items that they had requested were not part of the orders ultimately when they got to the home.
Now, the person that you spoke to, the CEO of that home, denied any law violations, I believe, and said that was just a sustaining practice for the home to be able to afford to feed the women there.
Correct. Yes, she denied the practice, and told me what I heard from other housing providers as well, that their housing program is filling in this void for housing assistance and for resources in particular to pregnant women. That's definitely something I heard from women who stayed at this particular home. I think this is a very nuanced issue. I spoke to women who said they were grateful that they had this option to stay at, this home because they felt that they had built a community with the other women there. But at the same time, they just felt really oppressed by all of the different requirements that were expected of them.
Some of the other requirements, I mean, we've talked about the fact that there's some homes that require you to turn in your cell phone or lock up your cell phone. But you also found homes that conducted random searches of the women's belongings and their rooms. One home required sexual abstinence from the women. What did you hear about those practices? Were those kind of outliers from what you learned?
That was something that I found at several homes around the state. A lot of these places post their codes of conduct on their websites so that the women are informed of what will be required of them before they move in, and they are aware of the expectations required of them. And in interviews with the providers that I spoke to, they just said that it just comes down to safety. A lot of these women are leaving abusive relationships or leaving situations that are harmful to them. And so for them, having these rules in place, makes sure that these women are protected from any further harm and trauma. But again, at the same time, right, there's this sort of tension between safety and protection versus, respecting women's autonomy to make their own decisions. And it's definitely something that a lot of these requirements sort of rub up against.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about maternity homes and the resurgence of them nationwide and here in Florida. You can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. You can email comments or questions to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Laura, you spoke to a former secretary of the Department of Children and Families, Mike Carroll, who himself is involved in one of these homes. What light was he able to shed for you in terms of the regulations that govern these when they are subject to state regulation and when they're not?
Right. So there are 3 buckets of homes in terms of regulations. So those that admit minors that are in the foster care system, those homes have to have state licenses. So what that means is that those homes have to make sure that their staff meet certain training requirements and that they also allow for state inspections every year. Then there's a carve out for homes with teenagers, and these are homes that are faith-based and are voluntary programs. For example, parents, not the state, allowing their children to stay there, as well as homes that don't receive any government funding. So those homes can register with a Christian nonprofit that conducts its own inspections. And, based on a review of the standards that we looked at, they require less training and formal education for their employees. And then there's a third bucket of homes, and this is about half of the homes in Florida. Because they don't accept minors and they only serve adult women, they do not have to be licensed by the state whatsoever. So these homes develop their own standards and their own rules. And what we found is that some of these homes are staffed by people who lack any sort of relevant professional experience. And when I spoke to Mike Carroll about this, he said that, these inconsistencies in care and oversight are troubling to him, and that they can potentially lead to some pretty abusive situations.
And so when you talk about voluntary programs, those are programs where the parent perhaps is given permission for someone to be in the home. And if those homes don't accept government funding, essentially, they are allowed to opt into this Christian registry that does its own inspections. You were not able to see those inspections, though. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We reached out to this organization. It's called the Florida Association of Christian Child Caring Agencies. They're also known as FACA. We requested copies of inspection reports for their maternity homes, and the organization denied our request. They told us that they don't need to comply with public records laws because they function outside of the state's purview. But we believe that because the state has delegated oversight responsibilities to FACA, that they are subject to public records laws in the state.
And that's something you're challenging in court?
Yes, that is correct. The New York Times has filed a lawsuit, and the case is currently pending.
So we talked about the fact that housing prices are rising and pregnancy laws are tightening. Spell out a little bit more about how that plays into these homes and the need for them, and what your expectation is in terms of whether they continue to proliferate.
Right. Yeah, I think there is definitely a connection between the, astronomical housing prices that we're seeing, in the last year or so, and that we'll continue to see with the need for these housing services. And one of the things that experts I spoke to that have also done research on maternity homes mentioned is this idea that there are very limited services for pregnant women, not just in the state of Florida, but in other parts of the country as well. And so a lot of charity-run organizations sort of fill this need where the state and federal government, has failed to meet these needs for these women. And so because of that, we do expect to see sort of a continuing proliferation, I should say, of these homes, not just in Florida, but in the rest of the country as well.
There are a few homes that you reported on that are specifically here on the First Coast in Jacksonville. One of them, the Divine Mercy House, you investigated in terms of whether they were as hard line perhaps as some organizations in terms of church attendance, and you found that the CEO there had a more lenient policy in terms of, I think she said that if a child is sick, she's not going to force somebody to attend church.
Yes, that's correct. I was able to speak with the director of Divine Mercy House in Jacksonville. They are one of the homes that requires church attendance, but the director of this home told me that, she tries to be very flexible with residents and allows for absences, of course, when, someone's baby is sick or when they have, some other sort of exigent circumstances that they can't control. They also have a rule requiring outings longer than 30 minutes, requiring written notice with the director and subject to approval. And the director said, as I had heard from other providers, that the rule is intended to ensure the safety of residents, especially those that have left abusive relationships.
Or are victims of trafficking, perhaps in
Correct.
some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also spoke to and looked at the in ministry in Jacksonville. That was one of the facilities that requires women to turn in their cell phones overnight.
Yes, the in ministry in Jacksonville, I spoke to the director there, and she told me that residents are required to leave their phones downstairs at night. And this is a rule that was instituted, she explained to me, in order to prevent disruptive conversations. So if somebody's, talking on the phone in the middle of the night, that may be disruptive to other women who are also sleeping in the rooms next door. But she did explain to me that in case of an emergency upstairs, the house does have a landline telephone upstairs for emergency use.
There are some practices that seem like they make a lot of sense at these homes, but they've also led to some really difficult situations. For instance, one home, I think reasonably had a rule against, no fire, nothing incendiary, but a mother lit some incense in her room one night. What happened? That led to a pretty dire situation for her and her children.
Yes, I spoke to one woman who was at a home in Melbourne, Florida, and she lit incense. She said she didn't know that was a rule violation, and she was asked to leave the property. at night with her two children who were sleeping. She called the police as well as the home, and the home ultimately agreed to put her up in a hotel for one night. But her situation is definitely something that I heard of repeatedly throughout the course of this reporting. Is just that residents faced very serious consequences for violating these arbitrary rules that often led to either eviction or also to the homes calling the police on the women as well.
And so she was evicted that night. The home agreed to pay for a hotel for one night, but that afternoon, she and her children and her pregnant self were without a place to stay.
That's correct. She was actually not pregnant, but she did have two very young children. And yes, after they checked out of that hotel the next day, they, were without permanent housing once again. And she ended up going to a friend's house after that.
Well, Laura Morel, a very interesting report. She is a reporter for Reveal. She is also a fellow with the New York Times Local Investigations Fellowship. This report was a partnership between both, and you can find a link to her reporting on our website. Laura, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Up next, we ask Atlantic Beach Mayor Curtis Ford what we can expect from his second term in office. Welcome back. The Atlantic Beach mayoral race shifted unexpectedly when challenger and former Atlantic Beach Mayor Ellen Glasser withdrew due to health issues. As part of our ongoing election coverage, I'm joined now by the incumbent mayor, Curtis Ford. Good morning.
Good morning.
So we initially booked you for this segment when it was a contested race. We appreciate you keeping the appointment now that there effectively is no race. You've been deemed elected without an opposition. How does this change things for you?
Well, first of all, running any race for political office is a stressful event. So this changes my life considerably for the next 30 days. I'm not running the race, but I'm actively engaged in several big issues for the city. And, of course, we've just come through 2 hurricanes. So flooding is a concern in the city. We're working on that. We have this coming year, we're going to open up and have a new study done to review and make some changes in our master stormwater plan to give relief to the citizens. And I'm happy to share a few of those details if you ask.
Tell us first, what is Atlantic Beach like, this beach community? I think a lot of times those of us on the other side of the ditch lump them all together, the beaches. But how is Atlantic Beach separate and distinct from Neptune and Jacksonville Beach?
Well, thanks. That's a great question. We look at ourselves as one beach community, Jacksonville Beach, Neptune, and Atlantic, but we are actually very distinctly different. Jacksonville Beach is more of a destination spot, although even in Atlantic Beach, we have what's known as Beaches Town Center, and I hope people that are listening to this show frequent Beaches Town Center. We have great restaurants and shops. But we are a smaller community of 13,500 residents. We are a bedroom community, certainly in the Northeast Florida area. We spend so much of our time and effort trying to maintain the quality of life as that type of community, and not a coastal destination like a Daytona Beach or even a Jacksonville Beach.
Yeah, and so what services does your city provide? I know that there's these interlocal agreements with, for instance, the fire department provides services, but what services does the city itself manage?
We manage pretty much everything. We utilize JEA for our electric. The other two beach communities have beaches. Um, what is it?
Utilities.
Yeah, I guess it's beaches utilities. But anyways, so we're JEA, but we provide our police. Safety. We provide water, potable water, sewer services, uh, uh, land development and building services, public works, public utilities. So we provide all the things that a city would provide. However, being part of the consolidated city of Jacksonville, most of our tax dollars go to Jacksonville, and then Jacksonville provides services back to us. As an example, um, part of that would be fire, although we pay for that, but we are part of JFRD. And the court system in Duval County is provided through the city of Jacksonville. We pay for that through ad valorem taxes to Jacksonville. There's some things that Jacksonville is responsible for. We're actually back talking about the interlocal agreement because some of these things are not being provided, and they should be. Things like dog catcher expense, beach maintenance, beach access. These are big issues. The beaches are for everyone, specifically for all residents of Duval County, but even for our guests. But the beaches themselves bear the brunt of the cost of maintaining good access and so on. So we have to have a better partnership with the city of Jacksonville. I'm very pleased to say that the Deegan administration is open arms to improving that relationship and support. And certainly the City Council of Jacksonville, I think, will back some of the recommendations from our committee.
And you're a local boy. You're a Fletcher grad. You're a longtime surfer. How have you seen the community change in your lifetime?
This is where you get me in trouble because it starts to point out just how long I've been at the beach. But when I was growing up in Neptune Beach, we only had one traffic light on A1A or 3rd Street, and that was at Beach Boulevard and 3rd. At Atlantic Boulevard, we had a flashing yellow or red, depending upon which direction you were coming from. And when wintertime came, people went home and did not come back across the ditch until spring.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it has changed a lot.
It's changed a tremendous amount. And it's this growth and development that presents the problems today. No matter where you are on the belief system of global warming and sea level rise, it is clear that we have storm events today that we have not had at the same level in recent decades. And so as development continues to occur, and we're built out in Atlantic Beach, but we have what I'll call redevelopment, knockdown rebuilds. And so lot coverage is a big deal because that water's got to go somewhere. So we just had we passed an ordinance last night doing some relief on our stormwater requirements, but we'll delve into the big issues on stormwater next year. We're having a consultant do a new study, and we'll be looking at ways of capturing and controlling stormwater to give relief to our citizens from flooding.
Yeah, because to your point, one of the problems with development is it creates impermeable surfaces.
That's it.
And so lot coverage matters in terms of.
Well, and thanks for asking that. Lot coverage matters for stormwater issues, but it's also about quality of life and green space. So do we want to drive down our streets and see wall-to-wall concrete? No, we don't. We want to see green space. We want to see trees. We are a Tree City USA designation in Atlantic Beach, and we have a fabulous community. It is not comparable in the other two beach cities, so we want to make sure we keep that front and center.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Mayor Curtis Ford of Atlantic Beach. He is no longer running for re-election. He is going to take another second term, but he's also taking your calls and questions. You can reach us at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We have a call from Steve in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Steve. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mayor Ford.
Good
or
morning.
Should I say Mayor Commissioner Ford? Would you explain to the listeners what your role and duties and powers are in Atlantic Beach as different than Neptune Beach, Jacksonville Beach, and Jacksonville with our
Sure.
It's called a commission city manager form of government.
Sure. Thank you, Steve, for that question. Uh, we are sometimes referred to a weak mayor form of government. The city is actually run by the city manager. So, for simpler explanation, he's the CEO of the organization, and I, as the mayor, am more like a chairman of the board. So, there's a commission of 5 people. I'm one of those commissioners. I'm seat one. So I have the same voting power as 4 other commissioners. There's each of us has 20% of the total overall vote, assuming all commissioners are there at one time. But as the mayor and a commissioner, my role is legislation, appropriation, policy to some degree, and direction of the city. And then in the event of disasters and emergency declarations, I'm the face of the city with the public safety and so on. So I have a role that's a little bit more expanded than the regular commissioner, but very much the same, and very much a deliberative body that has to find consensus to get things done. We do that. We had a great meeting last night, and we passed some minor changes to our stormwater code, and it was a give and take. We gave up a few things to get a few things, and we punted on some big issues that we'll readdress in the coming year.
Do you consider yourself a pretty good consensus leader?
I actually hope that'll be part of my legacy, is that people say that that Mayor Ford was able to bring people together. And I'll give you one of my I won't call it a challenge, but it's certainly a goal, and that is in the next few years, I really want to cement one Atlantic Beach. I want all of our citizens to feel as valued no matter what part of the city you're in. So we have the marsh front in Atlantic Beach. We have the ocean front. We have the west side of Atlantic Beach. We have the east side. And we have different areas of the city, and not all areas have always been treated the same. So it's my goal to make sure that we do that. And to that end, we put a lot of investment in Marsh Oaks, Atlantic Beach over the last number of years. The most recent investment is we've acquired a 5,000 square foot building next to Veterans Memorial Park off of Mayport Road in Atlantic. That building will serve that part of town, but it'll be a great addition to the city, both parks and community center setup that we have throughout the city to serve that area of Atlantic Beach.
Talk about the presence of the naval station, Mayport. That is a big part of that area. I'm sure a defining characteristic. How does that facility affect how you run your government or the lives of your residents?
It has a direct impact, and I'll give you an example in a moment. But it is so important, and having grown up in Neptune Beach and then Atlantic Beach, it's always been important to take care of our sailors and our service men and women at Naval Station Mayport. But it's in Bender, and I just have to compliment him and the former Admiral Aiken that just recently retired. Their outreach to Atlantic Beach and engagement of our community is just absolutely the best. They recognize the partnership matters, and I'm going to give you a great example. We just received a over $1 million funding grant from Congressman Rutherford towards a resilient project where we're hooking up our water supply to Mayport Naval Station, and vice versa. They'll be hooked to ours. It's not because we're going to sell them water or vice versa. It is a resiliency play in the event that either of our water systems are compromised, whether it be a terrorist event or a storm event. We would be able to use the other entity's water. That's good for our citizens. That's good for the base, good for the military, and good for the country.
I mean, let's talk about resiliency. You've seen the same maps that I've seen, I'm sure, that show over time, particularly maps like from NOAA. A lot of Atlantic Beach and a lot of Mayport is forecasted to be underwater or impacted by water in a very serious fashion. How do you manage that forecast?
Well, that's a tough one, because we're not going to become Little Holland and build a dike system around the island. but we have to do things every year, every decade going forward to plan for the future. And an example is changing our building code to add another foot above the base flood elevation established by FEMA. As we know, FEMA changes their maps over time, and they haven't gone down the last I've checked on base flood elevation. So, as we build new homes, we should be very mindful of that. It's hard to remedy existing homes. Raising a home that's on a concrete slab is not a financially viable solution in most cases, although that can be done. That's just one thing. We're a flat piece of land at the beach, and so one of the issues we have is we can't. You don't have a sanitary sewer system that's gravity fed. It's flat, so we have lift stations throughout the city that move effluent from point A to point B. And so we've been working hard to be resilient in that space, adding generators to run those lift stations in the event of power outages. But we're even going so far as we actually have a project to raise two of our lift stations higher than where they are currently so that they're out of the flood elevation.
Wow. We've got a call from Mary in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Mary. Go ahead.
Hello, Mayor Ford.
Hello, Mary.
I noticed when you started speaking that you said more or less whichever side of the equation you're on about, well, you didn't call it global warming, but about climate change.
Yes.
And then you just kind of proceeded. And I would like to know if you would be willing to say if you really do think that climate science is fluffy, or if you have your own opinion. As mayor, it matters what your opinion is about global warming as a concept.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. This is a long, long conversation, so I won't be able to get to the detail on this this show. But clearly, we have global warming occurring. Clearly, we have climate change, and clearly, we have sea level rise. So I'm a practical mayor. I believe in common sense over politics. So this isn't about Republicans or Democrats, conservatives or liberals. This is just the reality that we face. So to answer the question, my job as the mayor of Atlantic Beach is to steward or shepherd our city to a better place or the best place we can be, and that requires diligence with regards to sea level rise and the impacts of weather changes.
Yeah, and just to push on Mary's question a little bit, I mean, do you believe that this is human-caused climate change? Because there are policy, impacts if people believe that something can be done to counteract it by changing human behavior.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that humans impact climate. But I can't begin to, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to begin to try to figure out what those level of impacts are. I think the way I proceed in my own life is take care of what I'm doing first, and then I can take care of others. So I have to live the right kind of lifestyle myself. For example, composting. I'm a composter, protecting our trees on my own property, not just public lands. And so being a good steward means starting and showing on your own actions, and then you can do that for others. But I can't begin to play scientist on this and what level man is causing global warming. I'm going to leave that up to smarter people than me.
In terms of becoming more resilient, you actually tried a new tack with your partners in Neptune Beach during this last storm. These tiger dams that are inflatable, kind of with water, and they service as a alternate to maybe putting a giant pile of sand where you might have storm surge. So how did they work?
We didn't get to test them. So the storm surge did not breach or even attempt to breach the tiger dams. So it was a first ever application. I was delighted to see it in action. But I want to tell you there's two sides on this issue. So it's already bubbled up. That maybe tiger dams are not what we want on our dune line. So there are people that are very much in the know on what is best for the sea turtles, for our plants and protection of the dunes. And so maybe tiger dams won't be the solution in the future, although I do believe they probably can work pretty well. The city of Jacksonville is investing in these tiger dams and will be warehousing them at a location unknown. So they'll be more easily deployable in the future. And what I actually see for the tiger dams is a better application in protecting public utilities, buildings, police and safety. If you're in a flood-prone area, and the city of Jacksonville is already doing that. At the beach, what I would like to see is a better use of beach sand to actually plug those breaches in the dune line so that we're not bringing in tiger dams.
Yeah. Well, a lot to talk about. Mayor Curtis Ford, thank you so much for coming in today. Good luck your next term. We appreciate it. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Up next, a new art walk at St. John's Cathedral explores the question, what's going on?
Climate change is a big issue. How can I make a difference? Join ADAPT October 29th for a discussion with local leaders on the latest city and regional resilience efforts, including how you can participate. ADAPT, part of Jacksonville Today, is partnering with Jacksonville's Environmental Protection Board to present Regional Resilience in Action. Register at wjct.org/events.
On the next Fresh Air, Palestinian poet and essayist Musab Abu Toha. He's written a series of personal essays for The New Yorker about his experiences living in Gaza during the war. His most recent essay is called The Gaza We Leave Behind. He's now living in the U.S. and has a new book of poems. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
For years, Republican strategist Sarah Longwell has been conducting focus groups with diverse voter blocs. That list includes voters who supported Donald Trump in 2016, but flipped to Joe Biden in 2020. We'll hear her analysis on what's driving them in 2024. I'm Meghna Chakrabarti. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Nearly half of Americans have at least one step relative.
We have our family by blood, and then we have our family by love. And I have both.
So-called blended families are common. Both presidential candidates are in them. But along with their joys, they present their own set of challenges. The American step family, next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, what happens when the brown house at St. John's Cathedral meets the yellow house in Riverside? We're going to find out about it at tomorrow's Art at Noon Art Walk. And here to tell us about it, I'm joined by St. John's Episcopal Cathedral Bookstore Manager, Catherine Bissett. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm also joined by the Very Reverend Kate Moorhead Carroll, Dean of St. John's Cathedral. Good morning.
Good morning.
So this, I referred to it as Brown House, but it's actually the Cathedral bookstore and gift shop. Catherine, tell us a little bit about its history.
Well, the bookstore started over 10 years ago in a small office at the cathedral. Then, as we grew and expanded, we moved over to the Brown House, and we've been there for about 6 years. And so our new website that we have just launched is sort of the third wave of the bookstore's growth. And it's an opportunity for us to expand our ministry all around Jacksonville and even beyond, nationally as well.
So tell us about the mission of the bookstore. I mean, it's attached, obviously, to the cathedral, the work that the cathedral does in the community, but it has a specific kind of inventory.
That's right. Dean Kate refers to it as an alternative economy, which means that we are offering gifts and products that help transform lives and either lifting people out of poverty or supporting work of people who are disadvantaged. So it's a wonderful way for people to buy a gift that gives back as opposed to going to Target or on Amazon and just buying any old thing.
So give us an example of how that actually plays out in terms of people that you're items that you're
Mhm.
selling or where you source your inventory?
Sure. We have everything from local vendors such as Berry Good Farms, part of the North Florida School of Special Education. We also support Karis Chocolates, which is a social enterprise from City Rescue Mission. We also have stocked rethreaded products in the store. But we also have national social enterprises, Thistle Farms, which was started by an Episcopal priest in Nashville, and it helps women, supports a residential program for women who have had desperate things happen to them, and they can come in and transform their lives, move forward, and get employment. Prodigal Pottery in Alabama, a similar model, women coming in, making these beautiful pottery items and transforming their lives, moving forward, getting healthy.
Yeah. And so, Dean Kate, this is the bookstore and the items that they sell, but what is the crossover into art?
Well, we believe that every human being has a lot of power to influence the world, but one of the ways in our modern economy is we influence the world through our purchasing power. But most of us purchase without thinking about what we're doing with our purchasing power. We just look for a product and like it and buy it. If you buy with us, you're actually influencing the world in a better way. We also believe in the power of art to express what needs to be said in our culture and time. So we believe that hosting local artists at the cathedral, we have a art exhibition hall. We've turned our fellowship hall into an art exhibit hall, and we are able to lift up local artists and also sell their wares. So we're helping the local artists to make a living and to continue to do their art.
And so that artwork can also be purchased on the new website that you've launched. But you have
Yes.
this partnership with Yellow House. That's in Riverside. That's Hope McMath's studio, and where she also shows work very often with a social justice bent.
Right.
So how did you connect with Hope and Yellow House, and what is the goal of this event tomorrow?
So we've admired Hope McMath for many years, and we keep track of local artists. Hope, as you know, was the director of the Comer for many years. And Hope has this new exhibit, which is called Legacy Interrupted. She has looked at her own past, which is a past that involved the owning of slaves. And she has decided to look into her past and using her art to sort of begin to reconcile her past with her present. And that's this artwork is very, very moving and powerful. And she weaves in her own history with the work of Harriet Tubman and others to try to be a white woman who is honest about the good parts about her past, but also honest about the things that she wishes had not happened and trying to right those wrongs.
And this
So-
is sort of grew out of genealogical research that she had
Yes,
done.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And so this, she has done that work, and that is something that she's been showing. But there are other featured artists that are part of this exhibit. Amos Paul Kennedy, for one, who has got these amazing prints that are also with sort of a social justice focus in terms of phrases from famous civil rights leaders, and they're just kind of very colorful, interesting prints.
Yes, Yellow House has an enormous display of art. Right now at the cathedral, we're displaying Hope McMath's art alone in our exhibit hall.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, so it's like a swip.
It's like a swip
Okay.
flip flop.
So if people want to join the art walk tomorrow, what do they need to do?
They can either email us or give us a call at the bookstore to reserve a spot so that we can make sure we have room for them, particularly at lunch. We go out to lunch afterwards so that the members can discuss what we've learned, and it's just another opportunity for learning and connection.
Well, Catherine, Dean, Kate, thank you both so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank
you.
And that's our program. Thank you so much for joining us. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. If you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight, or you can find our entire program archive on your favorite podcast platform. Join us tomorrow for a voter toolkit. We unpack key contests to look for, different ways of casting a ballot, and the false claims that could discourage some from voting. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. An Evening with David Sedaris, Friday, October 18th and Saturday, October 19th at the Jacksonville Center for the Performing Arts, featuring stories, an audience Q&A, and book signing. Tickets available at davidsedarisontour.com. The Museum of Science and History presents Mission Astronaut, a new exhibition exploring life in space. Mission Astronaut is open September 21st through January 5th. More info at mosh.org.